Well, this is the Encounter Faith Podcast. My name is Ross, and Happy New Year, everybody. You're listening to this on January 1st, 2025, or much later. That is how podcasts work. But I'm sitting here with Pastor Tara Beth. Pastor Tara Beth, thank you for doing this.
Hey, Happy New Year.
Happy New Year indeed. So I wanted to spend some time with you today because one of the things that stands out to me about this time of year is everybody, regardless of your relationship with the church, everybody tends to be somewhat reflective as folks are listening to this. And I'm really curious how you look at this time of year, because I think knowing you a little bit, knowing how this is some natural rhythms for you, I think it can be helpful for other folks. So before we get into some of the specifics, because spoiler alert, dear listener, Tara and I are not sitting here on New Year's Day. How do you normally process this time of year?
I love this time of year. I love January 1st. In particular, I love new beginnings. It's one of the reasons why Mondays are such an important day for me. I talk about this a lot, how much I love Mondays. Yeah,
it might be the least relatable thing about you as a fairly relatable leader. Yeah. Your love for Mondays is something that, as your publicist, I would like you to work on.
Well, you know what? It's a redemptive thing for me, because I used to hate Mondays.
Sure.
My pastorate in Southern California was a really tough pastorate. And that was the day where I would always get mean emails. That was the day where I would look at giving or attendance and be really depressed. And really would just start off like just, ugh. And so years ago, God took me in a journey of just reclaiming things. And Mondays is one of those.
I love that.
Where it's been redemptive. And I now look at Mondays as a fresh start and a new beginning. So there's certain things like I never miss a workout on a Monday. I never miss a family dinner on a Monday. I never miss morning prayer on a Monday. I never want to miss lead team meeting on Mondays. Now, of course, like never, there's anomalies, but because I love looking out, like it's a new start. It's a fresh start in the same way with new school years, new seasons. And so January 1st is a very exciting day for me. It is a chance to reset. And one of the reasons why I love this so much, because it is such a picture of the kingdom. It is such a picture of grace. And January 1st, for me, always feels like a moment of grace where, 2024, I look back, I made some mistakes. There were some things that I didn't like, or some things that I'm not proud of, or maybe rhythms and habits that didn't bring out the best in me. And the thing about new beginnings and new grace is that we don't shame ourselves for those things. We don't beat ourselves up, but instead grace pulls us into that transformation of who God wants us to be, or who we want to be. And so, one of my practices going into New Year's is a time of reflection. And, I think part of that as well is because I'm a pastor, the season leading up to Christmas is so absolutely insane.
Yeah.
And most pastors will just kind of go into a cave starting December 25th into New Year's. Like we just disappear from the, at least I do.
Yeah.
I unplug the week after Christmas. And it's one of the few weeks where even just emails slow down. There's no to-do list with work. And so I just have this natural time to reflect and dream about the new year.
So one of the things that's interesting to me for a leader like you is you are someone who has a variety of different influences, a variety of different passions and different projects. You and Jeff are also raising teenage boys, and one of the things that is, I think, most curious to me is how you begin to segment some of that reflection out. Because I think there's this tendency for a lot of people where you said this in a sermon recently, where you try to sort of put your spiritual life over here, your personal life over here, and what I hear you talking about in so many of your messages and so many of the different ways that you are sharing more and more of who you are is you try to bring your whole self to whatever situation you're in. But that's a challenging thing to do.
Yeah.
And I would imagine it's not something that you've always been able to do.
Yep.
But when you are getting this time of reflection, how are you processing the many different, to put a little bit of a fine point to it, the many different roles or ways that you occupy the world?
Yeah. So the way that I think about that, the framework that I often go through is I first begin, what's my telos? Telos is this idea of like, what is our picture of the ultimate life? Like, so, someone might have the telos, well, the ultimate life for me is to live in Beverly Hills and to drive nice cars and to have wealth and have that.
Why is every person who has that dream sound like that?
They do. My ultimate is to live in Beverly Hills. And
everyone listening was just like, oh, that's Frank.
Yeah.
Like every single person. And even Frank was like, yeah, that is what I sound like. Yeah.
So for me, like I had to think like, what is the ultimate aim for me? Well, the ultimate aim for me is I want to live like Christ. I want to live like Jesus in all that I do.
Mm-hmm.
And so I have to think about that. Okay, so what are the things that I do? I'm a mom. I'm a wife. I am a congregant. I am a pastor locally and publicly, because I do have ministry outside of here. And what are the ways that, I express that? So I think about it through the lens of like capacity. I believe that God gives people different capacity. I also think that, like God can help us even increase our capacity.
Sure.
So a lot of people will say to me, how do you do all that you do? Like you do too much. And I think, well, I actually believe that God has graced me with a particular amount of capacity. I think there are times where I can get arrogant and try to exceed the capacity that God has given me, and I pay for it. Not because God is punishing me, but because my body will, like...
Pastor Jake likes to say, if you don't Sabbath, the Sabbath will come for you.
Yeah, exactly. And so when I think about with particular capacity, I develop something every year called a rule of life.
Love it.
A rule of life is actually a very ancient practice where we create rules for life. So instead of setting a New Year's resolution, I think, what are the rules for my life? Well, the rules for my life are, when it comes to, if my ultimate aim is I want to live like Christ. As a mom, I want to live like Christ. As a pastor, I want to live like Christ. As a friend. And what are my priorities with that? So then I might say, okay, my rule of life this year is we're going to have 3 or 4 family dinners a night.
A week.
Yeah. We really like our food in our house.
Just clarifying.
Yeah,
I mean, great.
Yeah. Like by 8:00, my boys are like, when's 4th dinner? I'm like, it's coming soon.
My favorite part about that is that's not true.
I have teenage boys.
Yeah.
Like we have to have 4 or 5 dinners a night.
I get that completely.
I feel like my grocery bill reflects that.
100%.
Teenage boys. And you've seen my boys. Like,
look,
they're growing like crazy.
I was a teenage boy before. I remember.
Yeah. Yeah, it's wild. So 4 family dinners a week. Okay. So then if that's a rule of life, then when I'm looking at my calendar and let's say, I have a couple church events and let's say I have like a couple opportunities, an invitation to go hang with my girlfriends. Well, I might have to be picky and choosy because I've decided, I really, really want to protect these family nights.
Yeah.
So for example, last week, someone invited me to do something on a Monday night and I said, I really protect Monday nights because that's part of my rule of life.
Yeah.
A rule of life might include dating my husband, so we go on Friday morning dates. A rule of life might include committing to morning prayer, and so and everyone's rule of life looks different. And friends, maybe in the show notes, you can, there's lots of websites that show people how to do rules of life, because they're all very different. I tend to segment mine into quadrants. So I have my family rule of life, and that's where I include like family dinners. I have my spiritual disciplines rule of life. I have my ministry rule of life. So for example, before taking on writing projects or speaking events, I will lean into people for wisdom before I say yes.
Yeah. Because I ask you that because one of the things that I think, there's a lot of things that I admire about you as a leader, but one of the things that I admire is your ability to I had a mentor in college who always used the expression, let the world feel the full weight of who you are. Mm-hmm. And I feel like in most spaces that you occupy, you are letting the world feel the full weight of who you are. And I think it's very easy for people to get tripped up, especially this time of year, because you set the proverbial too high of expectations, you fall short, and then there's shame involved.
Yeah.
What that framework misses is that we are constantly making those kinds of decisions. Mm-hmm. We are constantly evaluating a new opportunity against a value, a rule of life. Yep. So when that friend invites you to hang out with them on that night and you say, I really protect Monday nights, not in a sense of like you get this right every time, but how do you avoid the shame response or the guilt response or the over-promising response that happens so often where folks go, well, not this Monday night, but next Monday night. I'll compromise my values next Monday night, right? Like how do you sustain some of these things over the long haul?
Yeah. Well, thankfully this was a really good friend, and so sure. She understands, and her response to me was, oh my gosh, I love that you protect Monday nights for family.
Yeah.
And, I just try to be as honest as I can with people. I am an overpromiser though. That is my downfall. Like that is my absolute weakness. Cause I'm such an includer.
Yeah.
I love including, I love including people in things. I'm also very extroverted, and so like, I do tend to overcommit my social calendar cause I like people.
Yeah.
And it's not even just social calendar, but so much of my job is also like that relational building, which is so cool that like my job is so fun, like it's social. But
a decent number of people who are listening know that about you.
Yes.
The host of this podcast was accidentally recruited here. Like that yes. is a very true and beneficial thing about you for sure.
Yes. Such an includer. And so I will say like, it's not perfect. We were just talking about this. I think I probably have some undiagnosed ADHD. And so following a rule of life for someone who probably has undiagnosed ADHD is a task that requires a whole lot of grace for thyself.
And that's the thing that I feel like misses so often from this conversation, right? Where I remember hearing someone talk about the way that they engage with scripture. And they were talking about how when you have a newborn, when you are in that young family stage, like you think that the way you're going to engage with scripture is the same that how it looked in college. Yep. And then you have someone who wakes you up at 2 a.m., 5 a.m., 8 a.m., et cetera. And needing to embrace what they were like, I listened to the Bible because I understand that the word of God never returns void.
Yep.
And therefore God isn't worried about the time that I'm giving him in engaging in his word. God's going to take what I can give and leverage that according to his perfect will. And I think that we miss that for so many of these conversations because we go, well, if it isn't perfect, I don't want to engage in it. And one of the unique things about you is you are engaging this kind of ministry, but you also have a very local pastorate. Yeah. And I'm curious how you think about, especially since so many people are listening, are part of that, the way in which us as a congregation are walking into the new year. Like how much of the goals you're setting are about setting a goal for a group of people versus your own personal role within that group?
Yeah, so when I think about like setting a goal for like the organization or the church, it's very different than what, so we're going to be doing that in January as a staff, right? Like we have a special staff meeting happening the first week of January where we are going to be doing that. So when it comes to me personally, like I don't have like these, like, I don't do SMART goals for myself personally. Yeah. Professionally, sure. Personally, no. I like to think about it more in the framework of rhythms.
Like that.
So I think, for example, I lost 60 pounds this year. In the new year, I didn't set a goal of I'm going to lose 60 pounds. I didn't even set a goal that I'm going to lose weight.
Sure.
I did, however, decide that I was going to change my rhythms and my habits. That's what I did. And because I wanted to feel good, I wanted to feel strong. And when I eat cleaner, when I eat better, when I work out, I feel better. Mm-hmm. The outcome was that I lost weight.
Sure.
Okay.
Sure.
And so even personally, like, I sometimes get concerned, like people are like, I'm going to read the whole Bible this year. And I'm going to read 52 books this year. Uh-huh. If you're like me, like that's not attainable. Like we get distracted, we have ADHD and that falls off. But I can say I'm going to set new rhythms and new habits in my life.
Mm-hmm. It's like the difference between I'm going to read 52 books in a year versus like I'm going to wind down before bed. And that's often going to include a book. Yeah. Because then an outcome is 52 books. And I think that's helpful even in the context of the question, because one of the things that stands out to me, for me personally this year, is this is a year where I've had more proximity to pastors than ever before. Mm. So much of hosting this podcast was this sense of
for better and for worse, I bet.
But it was this sense of like, y'all have more to say than a Sunday morning can allow. And we launched this podcast in part to just provide more space and more context. And the way people have responded to it is going, I'm so grateful that these kinds of deep dive moments exist. Mm-hmm. But in that proximity for me, I go, that is a unique challenge of what you bring with you from 2024 and into 2025. So since at this point, the people who are still listening are a part of Good Shepherd, and almost certainly, I am curious what you are thinking about, praying about, hoping for us as a church as we head into 2025.
I love that. I think we are at this just new kind of pivotal moment, a new beginning for us as a church. Because when I reflect on the last year of what we've gone through, it's been a whole lot of whirlwind. And we left a denomination. We disaffiliated with a denomination. And so 2024 was the end of 2023 and the beginning of 2024. It felt like my hair was on fire all the time. It was just this constant, almost like we were in crisis mode for a very long time. Mm-hmm. And so pastoring was like kind of running on adrenaline.
Sure.
And then as soon as we finished that, I entered into a new phase of adrenaline where we went into a generosity initiative. Mm-hmm. And my hair was, it was really starting from late spring into we just wrapped it up. And so much of like my like focus, like organizational goals at that time were let's hold a church together while we leave a denomination. Can we just keep intact and keep doing ministry really well, right? Yeah. Like keep preaching well, let's keep doing the sacraments. Let's keep ministering to people, visiting the sick, right? Like it was like a real like baseline kind of goals this last year. Mm-hmm. In Generosity Initiative, we had a very particular goal that we wanted to reach, but then also consistently like still let's preach well, let's steward our resources well, let's do these. I feel like now going into the new year, God is calling us to have more tangible, achievable, exciting, and maybe even more aggressive goals for us as a church.
I love that.
All related to our mission statement, all related to the Great Commission and the Greatest Commandment. But like over the last year, we as a staff have in many ways been moving towards the same thing. First, like we as a staff, we were moving towards like, how do we hold our church together while we disaffiliate and reaffiliate with a different denomination? How do we now also then like get through this generosity initiative? So what's now that next thing that we as a church are going to be moving towards and getting after? Because I do feel like we've been riding this momentum wave, and I'm asking, what's that next wave? Mm-hmm. And that God is calling us towards.
It's interesting. There is a level of, dear listener, where this is a church that is congregationally led. Mm-hmm. And as a result, one of the things that stands out to me for those of you on the pastoral team is you have this responsibility to both care for and in a sense, work for the people of the congregation. And that's true in most churches, in most contexts, but I do feel like most people who are around Good Shepherd long enough comment on the uniqueness of that here. Mm-hmm. But one of the things that stands out to me is it feels like to me that one of the things for 2025 is this opportunity is we have reclaimed ground. Mm-hmm. And now there's a responsibility to do something with it. Mm-hmm. And there's tangible reasons, there's tangible things that are going to look like building construction and things related to generosity initiative. But there's also, and probably more importantly, there is a level of increased discipleship that is now a responsibility. Mm-hmm. Where because we no longer have these barriers, these denomination barrier, before you were here, a lack of a senior pastor barrier, then now it's a responsibility of we need to live into the full identity of who we are as a church. Mm-hmm. The advantages, the privileges, the challenges, the messiness, and the church word for all of that is discipleship. Mm-hmm. When I think about how we begin to move forward in that, one of the curiosities for me is how do you manage the different expectations of what that looks like? A generosity initiative is a great time to discover what people's personal opinions look like. Mm-hmm. And you are someone who manages this with a lot of grace, but what does it look like to take all of the different plans, all of the different priorities, all of the different opinions, and actually begin to move us forward?
Yeah, well, I think the process of listening is really important. For me as a leader, vision and goals and strategy I don't go in my office and just, pray for the tablets to come down from heaven. And then I go and say, here we go, guys, here it is. Uh-huh. But for me, it happens in collaboration and in listening. So the opinions and the feedback are very important. And I do feel like the last year, that has been happening.
Yeah.
That has been happening. And so for me now, it's how do I now take that and begin to articulate that and name that for everything that I've been hearing from our staff and our congregation over the last year. And now how do we put this in a kind of an attainable framework and strategy? And so, and then it also comes with I want to know, are we organized right as a staff to achieve those things? And our rhythms, set up for that, because we can set goals all day long, but if we aren't organized as a staff to even achieve it, then
then it's infrastructure creates culture and culture eats strategy for breakfast.
Exactly.
It's, I think, a Tara Beth quote.
Yeah. Yes. Yeah. Yeah. That's a good one. It's so true. The whirlwind eats strategy for breakfast, and so,
here's where I want to land the plane here. I think one of the unique parts about your ministry is how accessible you are. You are someone who I have seen drop everything to focus on meeting with someone numerous times, being present with someone numerous times. I have been that person numerous times. My curiosity here is how can the folks who are listening, who are called this place home, be praying for you?
Thank you. Tomorrow I am moving my mom into a nursing facility. My mom has been living with us for a couple of years now, and it's going to be very emotional. I know it is. It's going to be filled with a lot of grief. And, I remember the first time I dropped Caleb off at daycare after maternity leave, and I knew he was safe. Mm-hmm. I knew that he was happy, and I still felt like I was abandoning him. I know that I'm going to feel that way with my mom tomorrow. I know, I just even feel it now in my throat, so you can pray for that. I lost my dad a few years ago. And so even just going through the holidays and now going through this is going to be very emotional. So you can pray for that personally. When it comes to pastoring, my number one prayer request is always wisdom. For me, and Steve Cuss talks about this in his book, Managing Leadership Anxiety. But for me as a leader, the greatest source of anxiety is when I don't know what to do. And, there's always that gap for leaders. Like every leader experiences that gap on a regular basis when we don't know what to do. And so my number one prayer request is wisdom. And I think that the kind of leader I want to be is a wise one. I want to be known for leading with wisdom, and wisdom that doesn't come from this world, but a godly kind of wisdom. And because when I think about like a wise leader isn't knocked over by the headwinds of opinions. A wise leader isn't swayed by preferential opinions. But instead, I see a wise leader as someone that is so grounded in the ways of God. A wise leader is someone that is able to look ahead to the future without it being unattainable, and see a future with clarity, and without it being just causing the organization and the staff to have whiplash. You know what I mean? But instead it's a steadfast, it's a steadiness. Pray that God would help me be that kind of leader.
Thank you for leading with vulnerability and for all of the many episodes this year. And here's to a lot more.
Hey, excited.
Thanks everybody for listening.
Happy New Year.
Thank you for listening to the Encounter Faith podcast. This podcast is a service of G. Shep Productions from Good Shepherd Lutheran Church in Naperville, Illinois. All rights reserved. If you're in the area, we'd love to meet you on a Sunday morning at our 9 a.m. or 10:45 services. At Good Shepherd, we are inviting everyone to walk together in the calling of Christ for a life of eternal impact. This podcast is produced and hosted by me, Ross Cochran. And our theme song is Wake the Earth by 1111 Worship. Thank you for listening. We'll talk again soon.